talk with you, have us think together about America, about our country, what we worry most about America, and what we can do about it. Now, we the people have just sent the message once again to Washington. We're not happy and we want change. And we don't mean just change of faces and change of party labels. We mean a change in the way our system works. And of course, after slashing each other for months, our politicians have now told us after the election they're now going to work together. Well, we've heard that song before. We wish them well, but don't hold your breath. The problem is that fundamentally, we're a very divided country. We're two Americas. We're divided by money and divided by power. There's the 1% and the 99%. And there's Wall Street and there's Main Street. And when you get to the power game in Washington, what Wall Street and corporate America want and need is very different from what mainstream America wants and needs. And guess what? Congress listens to Wall Street and corporate America, and average Americans get lost in the shuffle. And the political parties are not much help. They're poles apart. They can't agree. Nobody plays in midfield. They're both in the end zones. And what we get is gridlock. You know, when I think of Washington, it makes me think of that cartoon, one of the favorites of mine, Peanuts. It's the one where Lucy has a card table set up in the backyard, and it says psychiatry, 1 cent. Well, you know who walks up, Charlie Brown. Puts down his penny, and Lucy says, you know, Charlie, before I can give you any advice, I need to have you think of life as a voyage on a great ocean liner. Now, there's one group of people, and they take their deck chairs up into the bow, and they look into the future to see where they're going. There's another group, and they take their deck chairs to the stern, and they look back to see where they've come from. Which group do you belong to? Charlie thought a moment, scratched his head, and he said, you know, Lucy, I'm having trouble getting my chair unfolded. So that's our picture of Washington, right? And we laugh about it, but it's not funny. We're very uneasy about it. And the worst thing is we feel as though there's nothing we can do about it. Well, I don't agree. I think there is something we can do about it. And as traveling the country over the last year or two, I found many people who realize that we've got to go beyond voting. Voting is not enough. We need grassroots civic action. I was up in New Hampshire last spring, traveling through a bunch of towns, giving speeches. And you know what I found out? People up there were passing around petitions in those towns, calling for a constitutional amendment to roll back the Citizens United decision, the decision of the Supreme Court that allowed unlimited donations into political campaigns. Do you know, last spring, 54 New Hampshire towns passed those resolutions. 16 states have gone on record calling for that constitutional amendment. So people are moving. Up in New Hampshire, they call it the New Hampshire Rebellion. I was out in Seattle a few weeks after that, and I was talking to a group of people. And when I got done during the question period, a gentleman in the back row got up and he said, you know, Mr. Smith, you talk about civic action, but where's the leadership going to come from? Where's the new Abraham Lincoln? Where's the new Martin Luther King? And I said, you know, we have to remember, both Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln began at the bottom. Lincoln was a country lawyer. Martin Luther King was a preacher in Atlanta. Leadership comes from below and it grows up. Starts with ordinary citizens like you and me. And I said, by the way, what's your name? And he said, Ben. I said, Ben, you're it. You're the guy in this room who is going to organize people to push for reform. Well, of course, everybody broke out laughing. Ben sat down. But do you know, an hour later when I left the building, Ben had a clipboard out and he had collected the names of 9 people to begin to work. And those people are still at work. They've expanded. They've moved into other buildings and other groups. I found that all around the country, in Florida, in Colorado, in Missouri, in Nebraska, places you think it might not happen. The common thread through all of this is that people in America are deeply, deeply worried about this country, big time. It's not just low ratings for the president or the Congress or the press. We all get low ratings too. People are worried that the system is broken. In one poll I saw, 96% of the people said they thought American democracy was being corrupted by all the money in our campaigns. You see poll after poll, 60, 70% of the people saying the top 1%, the corporations make too much money, they don't pay enough taxes. And you know, during recovery, inequality of income has gotten worse. We've had 10.5 million new jobs, but they're not terribly good jobs. Wall Street is celebrating, corporate profits are at record highs, family incomes are going down. The average family, the median family income today in America is lower than it was in 1999. 15 years, we're going backwards. What are we going to do about that? People are saying, you know, they're experiencing this trauma in their personal lives, this tension. And in one poll, people said, 60% of the people said, America is in decline. We've seen our best days as a country and a civilization. That is a really sharp condemnation. John Gardner, who founded Common Cause, said about 7 or 8 years ago, we're walking the edge of a precipice here. Civilizations die of disenchantment. If enough people lose faith in their society, the whole venture falls apart. Well, we don't want that to happen, of course, but what do we do? Where do we begin? Well, I'm a reporter, so I begin with questions, and the most important questions to me are why and how. Why are we where we are, and how do we get in this situation where Wall Street celebrates and Main Street stagnates? The common explanation for that is it's the market. It's inevitable. It's globalization, it's cheap Chinese labor, it's advancing technology. The middle class just got left behind because there's too much competition around the world. Well, there's some truth to that, but that's not the whole truth. That's a half-truth. If that were really true and that was the whole truth, lots of other advanced countries in the world would look like us, and they don't. What it misses that, in fact, as I got into my reporting, people cause the problems we have. People in government and people in business. And if people cause them, then people, we the people, can fix them. Let me share with you what I found out. When I went back, I found that there was a different America in an earlier period of our history from what we have today. There's an America from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s where there was widely shared prosperity. When the economy grew, the middle class did better. All the top 20% all the way down to the bottom 20%, they moved up together. Doesn't mean we had equality. Top guys and the CEOs of the big companies made 30, 40 times as much as people at the bottom. But what happened was, as we had greater productivity, as the productivity of the American workforce rose 97% over those 30 years, the median hourly wage and benefits of the average worker, it rose 95%. 97, 95, dollar for dollar. The growth in the American economy, the growth in the efficiency and the profits of American corporations got passed through to the middle. Wow. So how do we do that? What was the secret of that? And I found two things were really important: ideas and power. The critical idea was the idea that sharing the wealth was smart economics. Call it stakeholder capitalism. The CEOs of the biggest corporations in America, IBM, GE, GM, Dupont, you name them, they believed it was the duty of the CEO, the obligation, some said the sacred duty of the CEO, to balance the economic interests of the stakeholders in that corporation. Obviously, that means the owners, but it means the executives, the managers, the workers, the suppliers, the towns where they had their factories and their stores, the creditors, their customers. Balance them all. And that's what happened. They balanced them all. Henry Ford put his finger on the key idea. Henry Ford said when he doubled the wage of Ford workers from $2.50 to $5 a day, he said, not only is that fair, but if I pay them well, they'll be able to buy the Model T cars that we make at Ford Motor Company. And that's what those other guys said 40, 50 years later. High wages. Pay tens of millions of middle-class Americans high wages, and what do you get? You get high consumer demand. People go into the marketplace and they buy cars and refrigerators and cell phones and homes and everything else. And that gives you high growth. That's the secret of America's growth in that great 3-decade period. Economists call it the virtuous circle of growth. High wages pushes high demand, pushes high production, pushes people to build new plants, buy new equipment, hire more workers, which pushes high growth. That was the key idea, stakeholder capitalism. The other thing that was critical was middle-class power. Middle-class power, we had people active in all kinds of fields. Think of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and company, pushing to include Black America in the legal framework of American democracy. But we also had a women's movement. Women said it's not fair for us to be making 41 cents on the dollar for doing the same work as men. Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique 50 years ago in the middle of that movement. We had a consumer movement. Ralph Nader said Detroit's building cars with defects that are causing accidents that are killing people. We need consumer product safety. We need a National Traffic Highway Safety Commission. We need things to protect people, not to hurt capitalism, but to make it more transparent, to make the dealing between the producers and the customers more open. We had a labor movement that could bargain with big corporations for good wages and good benefits. We had an environmental movement. Think of it. On Earth Day, 1970, 20 million Americans got up off their couches, left their homes, shut off their television sets, and went into the streets. They went to college campuses, they went to malls, they went to the mall in Washington, they went on the air, on radio, they had talkathons. We want clean air, we want clean water. Do you know what happened? Within 1 year, Congress passed 7 major pieces of environmental legislation with massive bipartisan votes. 90, 95, 96, 98 to 1 or 2 or 3, both parties. So when the people pushed, the government responded in response to that. And the people pushed for a fairer economy. Tax rates were much higher then. Under Eisenhower in the 1950s, 92%. The Republicans, Democrats under Kennedy, 77%. And we had growth rates that were 3 times as high in that period as we had recently when the tax rate was 35%. So that didn't have any effect. We had higher minimum wages. We had strong bipartisan votes. So we had an economy that was responding to public demand to take the tops off the mountains and lift the bottom off the ditch. That's how we got this shared prosperity. So then the question for the reporter and the public is, what happened? How do we go from there to here? 2 things changed, ideas and power. Power was the first to change that we saw. It was interesting, we had an equal and opposite reaction to the popular movements I just described. When you had people power, we had a revolt of the bosses, a revolt from the top down. Okay? There was a famous lawyer who sort of articulated the ideology of wedge economics, the separation of the workforce and the profits of the corporations and the middle-class living standards. And they were able to carry it out through the political arena as well as the private sector. What happened was Lewis Powell, a famous corporate attorney, said the enterprise system, the free enterprise system, is being hurt by all these mass movements. Business leaders can't do what they want. We're not making enough profits. So he wrote a memorandum which became a manifesto for the corporations and said, get busy, get active, get to Washington, go after political power. And that's what happened. You know, when Powell wrote his memo in 1971, there were only 175 companies that even had offices in Washington. 8 years later, 2,425. His memo was circulated by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't because he was so influential, it's that business leaders were feeling on the defensive. And he wrote a Paul Revere call to arms, and they responded. By 1980, 9,000 corporate lobbyists, 50,000 people working for business trade associations, a huge lobbying army which changed the landscape of power in Washington. Absolutely critical. Changed the landscape of power. And what happened was they began to push for legislation and policies they wanted. Interestingly enough, it happened under the Democrats in Congress and Jimmy Carter, the Democrat, in the White House, before Ronald Reagan, which was a surprise to me as a reporter, something I learned new. The most pivotal Congress of the last 50 years was the Congress of 1978. In that Congress, they blocked a whole lot of consumer legislation, they blocked a whole lot of labor legislation, and then they got the 401k plan written into law. The 401k plan shifts hundreds of billions of dollars of costs for retirement from the corporate books to the pocketbooks and the checkbooks of individual families. Huge amount of money. They got the corporate bankruptcy law changed to favor management to the detriment of labor, and we see that roll out in the 90s and the 2000s in the bankruptcies in the steel industry and the airline industry and so forth. They got the interest rate laws changed, and that set in motion the housing boom and bust that we had in the 1990s and 2000s. They lowered corporate tax rates, and they lowered the capital gains rate by 20 points, from 48% to 28%. Now, everybody who invests benefits, but do you know 50% of the capital gains in America today are realized by the top 1%. So these were changes that heavily benefited people at the top. And then you move on to the Reagan era, you get tax cuts, that added $1 trillion to the wealth of the top 1% every decade. $1 trillion in the 80s, $1 trillion in the 90s, and $1 trillion in the 2000s. So you had policies that began to flow out of that greatly benefited the top, and the minimum wage stayed frozen at a level that is now 33% below where it was in 1968, adjusted for inflation. So those are political changes that fed wedge economics. And in the private sector, it fed wedge economics as well, because there was a change in that idea from stakeholder capitalism to shareholder capitalism. The mantra became in the business schools and in the CEO's offices, the sole job of the CEO, the mission of the CEO, is to deliver maximum return to the shareholders. Well, if you favor one group and you leave out all the others around that wheel, then they're going to suffer. It's been great for multinational corporations. It's been great for Wall Street. It's been great for CEOs in the top 1%. But shareholder capitalism has been terrible for middle-class America, for Main Street America. In the last 30 years or so, the productivity of the American workforce went up roughly 80%. And the median household income, the median pay for average workers went up 10%. And over that long period, you can see behind me, over that long period, the whole growth of the country's wealth, the top 1% got 84% of all the growth, and the other 99% got 16%. The top 1% got 5 times as much as the entire rest of the country. That's what we got with that. And it has not only been bad for the middle class, it's been bad for growth. Remember, high wages, high demand, high growth. Well, guess what? Low wages, low demand, low growth. That's what we've got. There are lots of studies that show high inequality of income is bad for the growth of the entire economy. So what do we do about it? Is there anything we can do about it? My thesis is that if we're going to fix things, we're going to have to rebuild the middle class in the economy and the moderate middle in our political system. And to do that, we're going to have to get the virtuous circle of growth going again. We're going to have to invest in ways that generate not just jobs, but good jobs, good paying jobs. And that means rebuilding American manufacturing. The muscle of a really strong economy, global economy, is in manufacturing. Look at Germany, look at China, and other places. We've been told manufacturing can't survive today. It is elsewhere. We need to do something about it. We need to modernize our transportation system, our ports, our airports. So I've been on the trains in Japan. Their Shinkansen speed trains are twice as smooth and 10 times as smooth and twice as fast as ours. I've been in the ports in China, the port of Shenzhen. It is more modern than all the ports on the American West Coast. Seattle, Tacoma, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Long Beach, okay? We've got to modernize. And that means a public-private partnership working together. People say, well, can it work? Is there any point in it? Can you do manufacturing? Well, let's look one moment at Germany. Germany took the other path 30 years ago. They stuck with stakeholder capitalism. German corporations have paid their workers higher than our middle-class workers. They've raised their pay 5 times faster than our corporations have, and we've been told you can't compete that way. Germany's competed very well. A month ago, Germany became the export champion of the world. Germany exports more than China does. We're the import champion of the world. We import more than anybody else. And Germany has kept 21% of its workforce in manufacturing, and we have only 9%. So there is another strategy. We can go somewhere else. Now, what about corporate mindsets and corporate thinking? We ought to do something about changing that. We ought to reward the companies that have kept their jobs and their businesses here in America and lower the tax rate for them. And then close the loopholes in the tax system that encourage companies to move jobs and profits abroad. Why don't we give a reward to companies where the CEO makes only 50 times what an average worker makes? Do you know that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, 2 years ago made 4,000 times as much as the average worker for Apple? So why don't we give a tax break to ones that make it 50 to 1? And then why don't we tax those stock options and stock grants given by the companies that send CEO pay soaring? And we can invest in our youth and give them better training. There are lots of things we can do, but we can't do these things in our economy unless we fix our political system. We've got to get a hand back on the control of all that mega money that is now flooding our campaigns. We got to bring the dark money out in the open. States can do that, can require full disclosure of all campaign spending. It's not being done now. There's hundreds of millions of dollars we can't even trace, don't even know who's investing the money and who's behind some of the candidates. So we can do something about that. We need to break the power of political monopoly in this country. We call it gerrymandering. Do you know that 90% of the districts of the House of Representatives are set up as monopolies by both parties, Republicans in some states, Democrats in other states, so that there's no competition. There's no way in the general election that the other party can win. And it cuts moderate voters and independents right out of the race entirely. The whole race is in the party primary. Here in this state, Washington State, you've done something different. You've got a top two primary, you bring everybody together, all the candidates and all the voters, and you've got a chance to pull people towards the center, revive the moderate middle, make them more important. Turnout goes up, and candidates have to appeal across party lines. They can't say or be as extreme. It helps break gridlock. So those are things that we can do. Those are things that we can do. Notice the word, not they, we. They're not going to change the political system in America. They like it the way it is now, the powers that be. We're going to have to decide to do it ourselves. Our democracy tells us we have the power, remember, consent of the government. Our history shows us, American Revolution, Progressive era, these movements of the 60s. But we say, can we do it? It's too hard, we're afraid, the obstacles are too difficult. Let me tell you, I've seen people power at work firsthand myself. I was there in Birmingham when they marched. I was in Nashville when the kids demonstrated, in Albany, Georgia. Martin Luther King and John Lewis and those civil rights demonstrators, they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk. And think of it, they faced mass arrest, cross burnings, church bombings, police dogs, fire hoses, and they kept going. I remember when Martin Luther King put on his coveralls, he didn't just give that speech at the Lincoln Memorial. He put on his coveralls, went out, and got arrested. And they denounced him as an outside agitator. And you know, he was very smart. That was meant as a diss, an epithet, a denunciation. He said, yes. He said, I am an agitator. Look in your washing machine. There's an agitator in the center. And it's agitating the water and the soap to knock the dirt out of your clothes. And I'm here to agitate to knock the dirt out of our society. Racism and discrimination and segregation. I think we need a new spirit of agitation in America. We need a new generation of agitators. I don't mean just the young generation. I mean all of us generations together. We can do it. We have to believe it. We've seen people do it in the past. It's our turn now. We can do it. We need to believe in it. Let's take action. Thank you.